couple more grunts, and they're
Right,
good to
right.
go.
A really, really good topic just came up.
Yeah.
Grease, Loctite, or anti-seize? Question mark.
Huh.
Just talking about these things. This is something that I have come up in comments all the time and is really good.
Thread prep is a big topic, and it's, there's companies that have dedicated their whole existence to it, and it's a fun topic. And sometimes it comes down to personal preference. Hey, Sal, come here. It comes down to personal preference. So, like in a bottom bracket, I can hear, or just bottom brackets in general, any three of them can definitely be correct.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Threaded BSA bottom brackets, like, something like this one,
Yep.
that I'm pretty much always going to recommend an anti-seize, because an anti-seize, it's going to be something, it's going to create separation from dissimilar metals, like in this case a steel frame with an aluminum CNC bottom bracket.
Yeah.
Keeps those materials separated, and it also provides lubrication, but in a very high pressure area. So in your bottom bracket, those threads are under quite a bit of pressure,
Yeah.
and then they also have to they sit in there for a long time, just static. They're not being undone and done and undone and done.
Right.
It's something that you want to be able to get undone, years down the road and pull it out of there. So anti-seize has a longer lasting, like stayability, we'll call it.
Yeah.
So, and then it's also useful in titanium, keeping things separate. But would grease be wrong in this situation? No, grease is great for bottom brackets. It's just not as optimal as an anti-seize. But then, like stem bolts, anti-seize or grease, both fantastic things to use. Loctite or a thread locker, that's a great thing to use too, because the thread locker starts out basically as a lubricant, and then once it's in there, and then as you tighten that thread, it creates pressure, removes all the oxygen, and it hardens. So you're providing this lubricant to get it up to tension. Because we were just talking about torque specs. When you're talking about a torque spec, a lot of torque specs are based on the desired amount of tension on the fastener. Something that in my history that was always crucial fastener that you had to do an exact amount of torque on, or yield points on, was like head studs in a car. And the head studs in a car, they're narrow, they are rolled down in size to be more elastic, so they stretch. And they do that so they provide a certain amount of tension. So that's often what a torque spec is after. But that torque spec is only effective if the threads are prepped correctly. So, like, if your threads are dry, even if you get to that torque spec, you might not be getting that fastener up to the correct amount of tension. So the thread prep is really crucial. So, like in stem bolts, back to that. Any three of them is going to provide lubricity, lubricate it so that you can pull that bolt up to the correct amount of tension.
Right.
Yeah, but it does depend on the area. There are some places that are crucial to have thread locker. I would say crank bolts or chain ring bolts. That's a place where usually you see thread locker.
Yep.
You can use it on your bottom bracket if you're having issues with them coming unthreaded. There's in suspension bikes, on the linkages, a lot of times you'll use a thread locker, or even in like a press fit situation, like on some suspension linkage bikes, sometimes they do slip fit on a couple different bearings.
Yeah.
And then you'll use a bearing retainer in there. So you need to be paying attention to kind of how to prep different areas, because a lot of times when you're pressing bearings in, you're just going to use grease.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden this bearing just slips right in, and you're like, wait, that wasn't a press fit. There was no interference. And that's when you use a bearing retainer. So it's meant to retain something cylindrical in a bore.
This is all really technical stuff that I did not know about. One thing I did get from this, though, so when thread locker does its thing and hardens, does that mean that when you take that bolt out, you should take the thread locker off of that bolt and reapply it again? Or is it good to put back?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I don't know 100% on that one, but I will say that I usually will clean it off because when you remove it, it has hardened and it's not necessarily as good as it once was.
Yeah.
Uh, Anaerobic thread locker, the stuff like a dry patch that comes on a bolt,
Yeah.
you can typically reuse it, but you definitely notice that it's not as good as the first time.
Interesting.
It's not something that you're going to want to trust if it's a critical area. So you're going to want to reapply. And you'll notice right away if you go to remove that fastener and you just put fresh thread locker on it, it's going to be much tougher to get out than if you had reused the thread locker that you had on it before. So
that's really
I would,
interesting.
yeah, I'd say new every time that you need it.
Yeah. This is all, it's just like, it's almost because I have zero background in anything besides BMX bikes.
Yeah. So for me, a little bit of my background, I grew up with bikes, biking all the time, loved bikes, raced BMX starting in like first grade and kind of going up until about seventh grade. And I got a mountain bike, started racing mountain bikes. Then started working in bike shops. Then I started working in tractor repair shops.
Yeah.
And went to school for automotive and diesel industrial. So spent 2 years of my life every day for 8 hours learning about what, automotive, diesel, and industrial. But
Yeah.
really what I was learning, and now looking back, was just mechanical fundamentals.
Right.
Thermodynamics and, this fluid and what it does and why and how, and these thread lockers and what it can do, and these anti-seize and like this fastener and why it's critical, and the criticalness to its prep. You got thread prep is crucial for this or that. Or all kinds of different things, or like hydraulic brakes, hearing about those from another side, another different industry. So I feel like sometimes it's really good to look at other industries for inspiration.
Yeah, it
Not
seems
sometimes,
like,
I always think it is. It's just crucial to look at other people who may be doing something better than somebody in the same industry as you.
that's a really good point. Like, how things overlap, and like a lot of concepts that apply to bicycle mechanics also apply to other mechanics. And you would think, man, that I would have way more in-depth like insight on this because my dad actually owns a transmission shop and has my entire life.